I'm here with David Pepose. He wrote Spencer and Locke, which is a indie darling, very well known. Most recently, Scout's Honor. He did the OZ was a Kickstarter project. And then he's just been around the industry. I've seen him in a lot of interviews. I'm excited to talk with him myself, and we'll see what happens from there. So that's about what I have. How would you like to introduce yourself, David?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for the lovely introduction. But yeah, you hit it right on the head. I'm David Pepose. I'm the Ringo Award nominated writer of books like Spencer and Locke and Going to the Chapel over at Action Lab, the OZ on Kickstarter, the upcoming Grand Theft Astro at Top Cow, and my most recent book, Scout's Honor, which just came out from Aftershock. I guess by the time this interview goes up, issue 2 will be coming out tomorrow. So be sure to stop by your local comic shop and pick up a copy.
Awesome. Yeah. I forgot about Going to the Chapel, and I still haven't got to read it, but as soon as you said it, I was like, oh, yeah, that's where I actually discovered you.
Nice.
Whenever Going to the Chapel came out, you did an interview on Cheers to Comics with Brian Wayne.
Yeah. Brian's a great guy.
Yeah. I love his podcast. Like, that's kind of my North Star, to be honest. Like, whenever I started listening to his podcast, I was like, oh, like there's regular people that can get into this. And so that's kind of the path I've been following. Like, he's such a good guy. He's really cool. And,
I love,
he's recently,
he's a sweetheart.
Yeah. He recently brought me into his Apocalypse group, so now I'm getting to meet all the people that kind of have helped him get where he's going. So,
nice.
He's a great guy, and definitely a pillar of the podcasting community for comics. Yeah. So I was excited to discover you there. But one of the more interesting things that I thought that came out of that interview, and you touched on it a little bit before, but at the time you said that you used to work for, I think you said Newsarama.
Yep.
And like one of the things that I really took from that interview was how well you put like your pitch and your package together. And so you talked a little bit then about how working for Newsarama and writing about comic books and the industry taught you to really like hone that pitch down to like that elevator pitch, that 2-line introduction. And I see it in every book that you talk about. So I guess that's kind of what I wanted to start with is like, how do you get to that point? Is it something where you're thinking like, I'm going to do a story that is these two things, or do you develop a story and then you kind of hone down what it is?
It's more of the former than the latter. I'm really into mashups. I like music mashups. That was kind of how I got my start. Spencer and Locke, my breakout book, the log line for that was, what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City? Because when I first decided to maybe try writing a comic, I wanted to do kind of an homage to old school Frank Miller. He was the first writer that made me realize that real artists and writers made these things when I was a kid. And so I thought, what would be the weirdest thing that I could throw up against old school Frank Miller? And a lot of the ideas I had felt kind of like shock for shock value's sake, which that's not really a good way to... You might be able to get your foot in the door with shock, but it's not really a good way to have reader engagement, to really kind of build up that trust with your audience. It wasn't until I thought of Bill Watterson's Calvin and Hobbes that I realized, oh, there's like a story here. It was a story about childhood trauma and mental illness and kind of the lengths your mind will go to protect itself from harm. But yeah, I'm always kind of trying to figure out like what's the next like pineapple pizza I can come up with, or getting a little bit of chocolate in my peanut butter. And yeah, I feel like kind of the stuff that I can throw against each other that feels unexpected, those tend to make the most satisfying kinds of sparks narratively. And so I'm always kind of thinking, I'm always trying to add things together. I'm always trying to figure out kind of where do things click together in unexpected ways. And that's been a process that's really served me well. I feel like it makes a lot of my stories feel a little bit out of left field. I think a lot of times when people hear my high concepts, they do stop and pause for a minute. Sometimes because they're excited, and sometimes because they're like, that sounds terrible. But all I need is that minute of hesitation. And once they actually check out how we put the book together, that usually wins people over in a pretty quick fashion.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, for me, like I've read a couple of series where like kind of their premise is very high concept.
Hmm.
And so what they do is they kind of hold the high concept part of it
Hmm.
to the end of the first book to kind of be the hook. Except for
Right.
sometimes what happens is once you introduce that high concept, it completely changes the dynamic of your storytelling. And
Sure.
so the second and third and fourth books feel completely different from the first one, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's one thing I've really loved about your books is like those high concepts, you don't seem to lean on them as a crutch to like hook the reader in, like what's going to
Right.
happen in number two. Instead, you kind of give it to us up front,
Sure.
but you seem to develop a lot of it and make it really interesting to get there.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, for me, I totally agree with what you're saying. I feel like it's so easy for people to write a first issue and you're throwing in all your character work and then the last page is, oh, the story's actually starting. And so the story doesn't really start until like issues 2 and 3. And yeah, that has its own sort of drawbacks. It's not a process that I super love, and so thank you for saying it. I mean, my thinking is always I want to give readers at least a taste of what's going on in the first issue, because yeah, that's why you plunk down your money. I everybody knows from the cover that the OZ is going to be the Hurt Locker meets the Wizard of Oz. So if I don't put you in the land of Oz in that first issue, I feel like I'm kind of picking your pocket a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I going back to I was talking earlier about how I was a Newsarama. Um, that was my first paid industry gig. I had been an intern at DC Comics, but it was during the recession, so there were no jobs. And I think my time at Newsarama really kind of helped me hone like what I liked and what I didn't like in the industry. And decompressed storytelling was kind of my least favorite thing. And so figuring out like how do we just cut to the chase already?
Mm-hmm.
It's more fun for me as a writer. It's more fun for you as a reader. And I feel like ultimately it's a little bit more of a sustainable way to go about doing things. I don't want to burn my readers, and
Yeah.
so if I can make sure that we kind of hit the ground running with the first issue, that builds that investment and that engagement that I was talking about earlier. And ultimately, like, I know you're only as good as your last book, but I'm also a big believer in that if you treat your readers with respect, your back catalog then matters. And,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that we're still talking about Spencer and Locke, that was my first book. It came out almost 4 years ago. That I think is a testament that, we want to make sure that readers get their money's worth and that they have fun reading my stuff, because ultimately at the end of the day, I could care less about the numbers. I could care less about the paycheck. Your reputation is the only thing you bring with you from book to book and story to story. And I'll go down swinging to protect that rep.
Yeah. I mean, I think like I understand the sentiment behind you're only as good as your last project or,
Right.
however they frame it. And I think
Right.
in Hollywood and movies, it moves a little bit faster. But to me, like your second and third books, that's where the last book is what really matters. But like in your situation, you've got what, 4 going on 5 books under your belt now. Like I
Yeah.
feel like that carries a lot more than like just your last project, At some
That's the
point you
thing.
gotta break through.
If one book can be a fluke, 2 can be a coincidence, 3 and 4 it starts to be a pattern. And so yeah, it's one of those things that I always wish that my books came out a little faster. But I at the end of the day, I keep reminding myself that if I met somebody at a con, they're not going to care how long it takes between Spencer and Locke Volume 2 and Volume 3, which I'm in the process of writing now. They're just going to care, was it good? And I think that's the thing that I keep reminding myself, and that's the thing that kind of helps me feel a little bit better when I'm feeling a little anxious about being behind schedule. Is
Mhm.
I would much rather take my time and get it done right. That I think is ultimately what I owe my readers, and it's a luxury that I've been able to afford as an indie creator. Is that I can take my time and I can make sure it gets done right, and I can throw myself in the double shipping meat grinder later when I'm a little bit more ready for it. But until then, I might as well use the strengths of the indie market to my advantage.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The other thing I wanted to mention, because you were talking about like you worked at Newsarama and that's where you kind of figured out what you did and didn't like about
Yeah,
the industry, or at least the content that was coming out of it.
sure.
Which is really interesting because I was just listening to David Harper off panel the other
Hmm.
day, and I forget who his guest was exactly. I think he did the Xavier Files or something like
Oh
that.
yeah, they're great guys. I like David Harper's work a lot,
Hmm.
and the Xavier Files crew is just top notch. I really like them a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things he was talking about is like we have a lot of these big like content mill websites now for the industry,
Sure.
where they have people just like writing to review and then you get it in there and you get it on the website.
Mhm.
And that's good for like the person, to get the experience and get their name out there and stuff. But what he was talking about too is like when they did the Xavier Files and stuff, what they were looking at is like what's going to draw people in. Of course they're going to keep coming back if they like you, but what's your unique perspective? What are you doing different? So I just
Sure.
think that's really cool that you're talking about like you were working for Newsarama and you use that time and that opportunity to look at the industry and say like, if I was going to write a comic, what would I do different, or what would I do the same. So
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because it sounds a lot more planned in retrospect than it was.
oh yeah.
At the time when I started out at Newsarama, I thought I wanted to be an editor. I'd done my time at DC. I'd worked on books like Batman R.I.P. and Final Crisis, and Green Lantern: Secret Origin, and me joining Newsarama was more of my way of keeping my toe in the industry while I kind of figured out what I wanted to do. And it took a really long time for me to kind of switch gears and then give myself permission to even think about trying to write. I was there for over a decade. I think I started, it was end of 2008, and I wrapped up my tenure in August. So, that's about a 12-year run.
Yeah.
And I served as the reviews editor there, and I think that was really helpful and important, for me learning how to kind of analyze and break down a book and articulate what I did and didn't like about it on the fly, and in a way that I had to show my work, and my review team, same thing. They had to show their work. I it's easy to be snarky. It's easy to be a jerk on the internet. But when you're writing for a site of record like Newsarama, that's you can't do that. It'd be like writing snark in the New York Times. And so it was a good kind of high wire act. I got to the point where I could read a book and write a review and turn it in, and it'd be a solid, if not good, review within 45 minutes. It was just like
Wow.
the muscle memory it was there. I hope to get that way with my scripts someday. It's very different. Writing reviews reactive versus creating a script is kind of you're creating it often out of whole cloth. But yeah, it was such a wonderful opportunity. It really felt like it was my boot camp in a lot of ways. And I say that at the time it was, I think, 8 years at Newsarama when I came out with my first book, and I said that was just enough time to barely get my first book across the finish line. But it was, you can learn so much academically, but you hit a certain saturation point, and once you put it into practice, then that's when the rubber really hits the road, and you start to really kind of figure out very quickly what is tried and true and what's nonsense.
Yeah. What is your turnaround time, generally, I guess, from like, inception of the idea to like where you get at least to like a workable point?
Boy, that's a tough question because there's certain sections of it all. There's the story generation of it all, the outline or the treatment, however you want to call it, and that takes me a little while. That can take me, if I'm really kind of putting pedal to the metal, I can get something done in about a month. But usually it takes me closer to 2, just to kind of hammer out like, okay, these are the big set pieces that I want, and here's the character beats that I want, and how am I going to get from point A to point B to point C? That's usually kind of the tough part for me, is just kind of the connective tissue. Once that's done, however, scripting is usually the quick part for me. That's when I start to kind of really have fun. The themes start to kind of present themselves a little bit more, the character beats and the fun bits of dialogue. At that point, it's like I know the notes, but I get to sort of put my own riff on it. I get to play with the rhythm a little bit. And that, if I'm working at a good clip and like, not too much is going on, I can usually get a script done in about a week or two. And then the real challenge, and this is sort of where it's a moving target because it kind of depends on my collaborators, it's the production side of it. And the production side, that usually takes anywhere from like 8 to 12 months, depending on who I'm working with, how long the story is. Do I have my team together in one shot, or is it something that I gotta kind of put together a little more piecemeal? So yeah, I mean, like my book, The OZ, for example, I finished writing that, I guess it was last summer. I think it was around when I was writing Scout's Honor. I finished the OZ. So it's probably around June or July. But my artist Ruben Rojas is still in the process of drawing. I think it's issues 3 and 4 right now. So it takes a little bit of time, kind of depending on who you're working with. But at the same time, like a book like Scout's Honor, where I'm working with a publisher and I'm working with editors who have their own set deadlines for things. I pitched that book. I guess it was August of 2019. Got it greenlit around Christmas. Signed my paperwork and contract in March, and I finished writing that series just before the July 4th holiday. So it kind of depends on who I'm working with as well. If it's a publisher like Aftershock that needs a book done at a certain time, I feel like Luca Casalanguida, the artist on that book, he came on, it's probably like mid-March, maybe early April, and he finished drawing the book April, May, June, July, August, September. I think he finished it shortly before Thanksgiving. So it took him about 8 months to draw 5 issues, which is, I think, fairly fast. Yeah, it's always, but it varies from the book. I can tell you, going into the chapter.
Scout's Honor.
That's Scout's Honor.
So all 5 of those are already done.
The line work is done. I think they're working on final colors and lettering right now.
Okay. Whoa.
But,
I mean, that's still great. I thought you meant like all 5 were completely done before the first one even came out, and I was like, man, that's impressive.
They're basically done with the book. I think they're just finishing off like probably the last issue now, just the colors and putting the colors and the lettering together. But that said, I have books like Going to the Chapel. That took me 8 months to really hammer out the treatment for that. Once that was done, I wrote all 4 issues. I want to say it was in like 2 or 3 months. That went but it just took so long to choreograph. I think I had 15 speaking roles all in one spot. And so I had to choreograph like a football play, who was going to be in what area of this chapel in any particular given scene. Because my artist created a fully 3-dimensional chapel model for the book.
Whoa.
That's awesome. So, but it's like every book has its own challenges, and there are certain other considerations you take into the mix. Like, is it a genre I'm used to playing with? Am I doing narration? If I'm not doing narrative captions, it usually moves a lot faster. And then, it's just, putting the team together. I'm currently staffing, I think, 2 or 3 different books that are coming down the pike now. And that in and of itself is its own kind of stress, because you want to make sure that you find the right people to realize and breathe life into this book. And it's not something that usually happens on the first try. And so you got to kind of, you have to keep your eyes open, and you have to send a lot of emails, and you have to deal with a lot of rejection just because people get booked. But at the end of the day, it's worth it. It's the hardest job I've ever had, but it's certainly the most rewarding.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I kind of want to like compliment you and ask a question at the same time.
Oh,
But
thank you.
all I've personally read is like the first issue of Spencer and Locke, and then the first issue of Scout's Honor. And then I know quite a bit about your other books because I listen
Sure.
to too many podcasts and stuff, but
Yeah.
there's definitely like an evolution to your writing.
Thank you.
Because like you span different genres,
Hmm.
but at the same time, also like reading Spencer and Locke, it's very like detective noir, so you have two characters moving through the world and the world's kind of like building around them.
Yeah.
And it seems like a very linear narrative
Sure.
versus like Scout's Honor. There's like, I don't know, 3-4 major moments in there that are very separate. And it just makes the whole story and the book feel more robust,
Thank
So,
you.
like not only compliments to like your writing skill and talent, it's developed a lot from what I can see, but like, how do you know like what genres you're moving into and how much more complicated does it get to develop something like Scout's Honor versus Spencer and Locke?
So, for me, I always am trying to play in different genres. I love writing crime stories, but like that's only kind of one food group in the comics industry. And so a lot of it is sort of every time I finish a book, I have a bucket list going in. And so I get to check off little items that I'm like, okay, I got to do, a cool sci-fi thing. I got to do a car chase. And that, or I got to do like a cool, like, badass villain. However, the problem is every time I finish a book, I seem to find that I've added more things to the bucket list. I'm always writing in reaction to what I just finished writing. That just seems to be the way that I do things. For example, my upcoming story in the Big Hype anthology, Roxy Rewind, that's a character I've had in my head actually predating Spencer and Locke. But part of the reason I wanted to get that story made was, one, I was offered the opportunity to tell a 20-page story in an anthology, which is usually unheard of. But also I was tired of not having something on my convention table to sell to children. And so having something that I could show to a younger reader, that kind of pushed me in that direction. But every different genre and every different story has its own kind of pros and cons for developing things. I mean, Spencer and Locke, I did a reread of all of Bill Watterson's Calvin and Hobbes. That's 10 years worth of strips, just to kind of practice, to get ready and study and do research. And I did the same. I reread it when I worked on the sequel, Spencer and Locke 2, and I'm in the process of rereading it again right now, along with Charles Schultz's Peanuts and Jim Davis's Garfield for Volume 3. So in that regard, for me, it's always just figuring out what's the iconography that I can play with. What's the imagery that people are expecting for any particular book? Going to the Chapel is wedding imagery. Scout's Honor, it's a book about a post-apocalyptic Boy Scout cult. So figuring out what's the iconography of the Boy Scouts. I am drawn to stuff that has a lot of imagery to it. And I think the Boy Scouts in particular, as an organization, there's a lot of imagery. You've got the merit badges, you've got the actual Scout laws, you've got all the way down to sort of this apocryphal tale of the founding of the Scouts and the quote unquote unknown Scout that helped lead the Scout founder when he was lost in London. And, instead of getting a reward, he just said he was doing his good turn for the day. So, I think it depends on the story and kind of how I'm angling it. Scout's Honor, a lot of the fun of that book was figuring out what's a Boy Scout cult look like, and sort of adding in kind of the religion to this cult. But as a result, it's sort of a very different kind of story. I'm not as focused on our main character Kit's backstory. We do get into it a bit. Actually, the preview for issue 2 is up online at the Comics Beat, so you can see we do get to show, well, why did Kit why is she as a woman has to conceal her own identity to be a Ranger Scout? Why is she doing this? It's obviously it's a much harder life to live. We get to see a little bit of why that is. But the thrill of that story is about like, well, what's this world? What are these twists this world is going to take? And what are the secrets that this Boy Scout cult is hiding? Versus Spencer and Locke, where it's all about, what was Locke's upbringing like. We really dive in deep as to like who is he as a character and like why is he as messed up as he is. So yeah, I mean, different stories have like different challenges to it. I just finished, or I'm in the process of working on my first horror book right now, and that's one of the projects that I'm staffing at the moment. And it was weird working on a script that doesn't have a whole lot of ready action beats to it, that you have to kind of lean in on the mood of it all and sort of the tension. Mm-hmm. And finding an artist that can reflect that is a very different skill set than what I'm used to. I'm used to looking for these hyperkinetic people, who can do, spaceships running at 1,000,000 miles an hour or car chases or what have you. And so trying to do horror, I'm kind of like, oh, I got to recalibrate. This is good. I feel like anytime that I have to sit back and recalibrate means I'm doing something right. Mm-hmm. It means that I'm trying to kind of grow as a storyteller a little bit. Some of that is pragmatic, like I said, like it's always trying to, serve the reader. I think is a huge compliment that you think my work has evolved. I also want to keep readers on their toes because there are some people that might not like Scout's Honor or might not like Spencer and Locke, but I'll say, oh, well, check out Going to the Chapel. And they'll be like, oh, I didn't think you had that kind of book in you. It's also a little bit selfish because I just get bored really quickly. I get restless. Everybody keeps asking, Scout's Honor is a 5-issue mini, and everyone keeps asking, is it an ongoing? And I'm like, I'm flattered that you would think that. But I, as somebody who wrote Scout's Honor and loved writing Scout's Honor, I would lose my mind if I was working on an ongoing right now. I like to kind of bounce from project to project and flavor to flavor and vibe to vibe. And that's the great thing about comics is unlike film and television where they really want to pigeonhole you. Comics, I can write a book like Spencer and Locke and a book like Roxy Rewind and a book like Going to the Chapel and a book like Grand Theft Astro, and nobody's going to bat an eye. They're just going to be like, wow, that's eclectic. And, I want to be like Baskin Robbins, I want to have 31 flavors. I want to make sure that I think everybody, even people who don't read comics, everybody's got a favorite comic. They just don't know what it is yet. And I want to make sure that any possible reader that comes up to my table, that I have something to show them that they'll fall in love with.
Yeah. I mean, credit to you. I think that's what has kind of made you into such an indie darling is that, everything you do is a little bit different from the last. And therefore, sure. Like you said, if somebody isn't really into like the Sin City noir vibes, well, check out Going to the Chapel or the OZ or Scout's Honor, or, if you're not into post-apocalyptic stuff, look at so giving yourself so much range and opportunity, like you said, it's good because it doesn't pigeonhole your career, but at the same time, it also gives you more exposure, you know, and so everybody has something they can associate with David Pepose,
Yeah. And it's one of those things like I'm finding that certain genres are easier than others. I mean, I always gravitate towards crime. I even some of my sci-fi pitches have degree of crime to it. Things like fantasy, I really like. Working on the OZ was super fun, and I think there's to a certain extent it shares DNA with Scout's Honor. Sci-fi is hard. Sci-fi is like my big challenge, and so I've been like really focusing hard on working on sci-fi. Grand Theft Astro has been long in the works. The book has been written. We're just sort of waiting for the art to commence on that book. But I'm kind of like, well, sci-fi is a big staple in this industry, so I need to make sure that I can master that. My mother was a college professor. She's retired now, but I think they always kind of instilled in me this like love of learning. And I feel like if I'm doing the same thing for too long, I tend to get restless. And that's what I love about comics is I never have to do the same thing. Even day by day on the same script, I'm still taking different angles on the same project. And as I think I'm getting a little bit more sure of myself as a writer, I'm able to kind of multitask a little bit more. And I think that really has kind of made this career, which has already been really fun, it's really kind of taken it to the next level of just a lot of excitement and makes me wake up thrilled to do this gig every day.
Awesome. Yeah. I the other thing I want to ask you about
Sure.
is titles,
Yeah.
because like I've heard you talk before and you were raised like in conservative Missouri and
Yeah.
stuff like that. But you also seem to have like this ability to kind of tap into like pop culture and like things that like titles that really kind of explain what like Spencer and Locke sounds like Calvin and Hobbes
Right.
or something noirish, you know,
Mhm.
and Going to the Chapel reminds me of like Smoking Aces or
Mhm.
oh man, there was another movie that was kind of like that, but they kind of have this like action comedy shootout
Sure.
kind of vibe to them. The OZ does like such a great job of depicting like you know, an occupied territory, but at the same time like a DMZ vibe to it.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then Scout's Honor is just like, you know, nail hammer on the nail's head, you know, like it's
Eh,
such a cool title. Like
thank you.
how much time and like how do you find like such good titles for all your stuff?
Well, thank you. A lot of it comes from I love puns, you know, and wordplay. My first full time gig out of college, when I was moonlighting at Newsarama, I worked as a newspaper reporter and night editor, so I did a lot of headline work. And uh, I I'm actually a certified Punderdome champion. They do a monthly competition in New York City called Punderdome, and I used to do that every month when I lived in New York. And so I always respond to that kind of wordplay, and that is really kind of the litmus test for me. Is if I don't have a title that like really kind of crackles, it I often don't feel like it's ready for prime time. And so I usually I've been pretty lucky in that the titles kind of click pretty quickly. But there have been a handful that I've had to wrestle down. Actually, the next project that I got to start work on, which is another horror series. I was like struggling for about a month to figure that out, and that's always the worst. I have like Google Docs open, just like typing random words. I have a thesaurus open. I've got words related to website that I just, and I'm just constantly like sitting there looking, just being like, what is the stupid word? I know there's a word to this. And I eventually figured it out. And you know, sometimes it's like you're walking around, sometimes you got to just hop in the shower and think. I have a lot of my best ideas in the shower. Um, uh, but yeah, once you have the right title, you can like almost hear it click.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I'm kind of constantly thinking about that sort of thing. And yeah, you know, just exactly what you said. Like, what can I do that kind of evokes what this book is about? You know, Spencer and Locke. It was one of those Spencer and Locke in a lot of ways. I mean, I love that book. It's my baby. It's my firstborn. But that was always the title that bugged me the most, just because I was like, oh, it's the one title that like doesn't really say what it's about, but neither did Calvin and Hobbes, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I find that there's always the perfect title to a concept. And boy, sometimes I gotta like really eviscerate myself to like figure out what it is. There's a comedy pitch that I'm in the process of shopping around right now that I'm still not like 100% on the title. And that was after me and like a couple of buddies have been like hacking away at it for weeks. But yeah, I think my pun background has certainly served me well. Because yeah, if you get like a good pun in there or something that you know really kind of illustrates the characters or illustrates the setting, that I think kind of takes you a long way. I also, because this kind of comes from a newspaper background a little bit, is I'm always kind of thinking about the logos a little bit and kind of how would this thing look. I was really fortunate that Colin Bell, my letterer on Spencer and Locke, like I had him to kind of show me the ropes a little bit. He came up with the logo for Spencer and Locke, but I've either come up with or had input on the logos for every book I've done since. I built the logos for Going to the Chapel, Grand Theft Astro, and the OZ. And Scout's Honor, I had a pretty heavy hand on how that logo looked. And I think that helps too, is sort of figuring out, you know, what's a kind of effect, what's something cool that you can do to really make this thing kind of pop a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think I'm like a super skilled letterer. You know, I certainly couldn't do my own lettering as much as I'd like to, but being able to have like a little bit of a visual idea of like what you want the logo to look like helps me figure out titles and helps me figure out like, okay, like this title's not really ready for prime time, whereas this one, like that's a dope title. When you have the right title, it that lights a fire under me, and then I'm like, I have to get. I almost spilled the beans on a title. I have to get this book. I have to get Horror Book done
Yeah.
because this is a good title, and it won't let me rest until it is written and done.
Yeah. That's also, it's also really interesting how you talk because you know, a lot of writers I've heard speak, they really don't talk about the visual side of things a lot outside of like the final product, or like once the book is finished, or once I saw the concepts or whatever, you know. And you kind of talk about like the imagery within the story, you talk about like how important the logo design and stuff is to you. So like you definitely seem like a different kind of writer, and that the imagery is very important to you from the beginning. So like
Sure.
how important is that really to you?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is I'm simultaneously like the ringmaster, but I'm also like the least important part of the puzzle. I think this comes from my DC intern days, is that like I got to watch all of the different process. You know, I was formatting scripts, I was doing color notes, I was doing balloon placement, I was finding reference for the different artists, and having kind of been the de facto editor on much of my books. You know, I can't leave that to chance. I have to kind of know, you know, how's this thing going to come together? How's this thing going to play out? And when I'm writing my scripts, I have to know while I'm writing them, how's this going to stack on a page? I often will send layout proposals to my artists and saying like, if you've got a better idea, run with it. But if you don't, like, this is kind of how I paced it when I wrote that script. And I'm pretty hands-on when it comes to you know, I have a lot of discussions with my artists in the thumbnail stage, just kind of figuring out like what's our best angles here. That's why I love working with artists like Luca Kessel-Guida, Ruben Rojas, George Santiago Jr. You know, it's been fun kind of figuring out their strengths and them figuring out kind of how my writing works, and then being able to play off of that a little bit. My colorists, I'm especially hard on. I always feel a little bad for them, but I was taught at DC that good art will make or break your comic, but good colors will make or break your art. And finding the right colorist, the right colorist will elevate any book. Finding the wrong colorist will hobble even the strongest of line work. And so I'm very hands-on with my colorists, you know, working with people like Jason Smith, Liz Kramer, Whitney Kogar, you know, being able to work with them and sort of figure out, okay, like fine-tuning it. Sometimes it's a little trial and error, figuring out like what looks best on this book. You know, I was really thrilled to be working with somebody like Matt Milla on Scout's Honor, because Matt is like a legendary colorist. You might know him for his work on Daredevil with Ron Garney, and Matt doesn't need hand-holding. You know, if Matt, you know, Matt doesn't have the time for the hand-holding, but he also just doesn't need it. And so like I see his pages come in, I'm like, well, that looks great. You know, no complaints here. But yeah, I'm constantly kind of trying to figure out like, how does this all fit together? And this comes from sort of my critic background, and it's something that I'd like to be a little more proactive with, actually. But you know, it's one of those things, if something doesn't look right, you know it when you see it. And I always kind of tell my collaborators that I'm like, I apologize in advance, but I would always rather you hear it from me than from a stranger, because if you hear it from me, there's still time to fix it. So I always kind of look at my work, especially in the production stage. I'm like, if I was a reviewer reading this, what would I say? And that is usually pretty good about me being pretty ruthless with every element of it, including my own dialogue. You know, I feel like a lot of what I write the majority of it stays as is, but oftentimes I'll see how the lettering plays out on a page and realize I overwrote it, and I'm like, gotta slice this sentence down, or something popped up in the art and I'm realizing, oh, I did not make this clear in the art or in the script. I got to rewrite to like kind of fit the art now. They say there's the movie you write, the movie you shoot, and the movie you edit. Comics, it's the comic you write, the comic that's drawn, and the comic that's lettered. And so I always love working with my letterers, Colin Bell, Dave Hopkins, Ariana Mayer, just to name a few. Carlos Manguel for Scouts Honor. I like working with them because they're sort of the guardrails. They're the ones who, like, if I miss something in the art and now the art's there, they're the ones who kind of help me. I'm like, okay, this is how I make sure the book sticks the landing, and it makes sense. So yeah, I've really enjoyed working with them, and I think being sort of the editor on a lot of these projects, it has sort of given me a greater appreciation for all elements of the production process. And it certainly makes me thankful for working with people like Christina Harrington and Mike Martz over at Aftershock.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you'll receive this because everybody has their personal opinions, but
Sure.
listening to a lot of what you say about production and the production side of making your books, reminds me of Robert Kirkman. I watched an interview with him. Oh, see, there we go. Awesome.
Yeah, huge compliment. I'll take it.
Yeah, I was watching an interview with him back, I think, before Firepower came out.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, he was kind of talking about that too. Like, he started at the ground level and he was having to do everything. Like, he was writing the scripts and he's working with the artists and he's working with the lettering team and he's doing the marketing, and then whenever he started work, I don't know if he worked or interned at Marvel for a little while.
Okay. I know he wrote some books over there too. So.
Yeah. So he did work for him, but he said one of his biggest problems there was he was already in this mode of like, I have to do everything, like I have to project manage my book, and then he got to Marvel and he's writing and they're like, no, don't mess with the artist. No, don't mess with the lettering. No, don't, we'll handle marketing. You don't have to do any. And he said that was a big part of why he ended up leaving Marvel ultimately, was just, it wasn't that he couldn't work with them. It's that he felt almost bored because he was so used to doing every element of it. So I guess to kind of like turn that into a question for you, like, do you have aspirations for the Marvel and DC game, or are you happy in the indie market?
Look, my answer, is if the big two come calling, I will happily answer the call. Like I said, I got my start at DC. Grew up reading the big two. As a kid, huge fan of all of that. In fact, before I kind of dipped my toe in the pool of writing my own stuff, I was so frustrated with the comics industry in general. The thing about being a comics reviewer is you're a kid in a candy shop where statistically 50% of the candy is rancid, and you don't know. And like, based on the wrapper, sometimes based on the wrapper, but most of the time you don't. Most of the time, you have to try it, and sometimes it sucks, and it comes in kind of waves and ebbs and flows, and I had kind of hit one of those ebbs where it was like nothing was really clicking with me, or very little was clicking with me, and I kind of thought I better change my relationship with comics or I need to leave. And something that I did kind of during the nadir of the New 52, I wrote 52 pitches for DC. Not anything that anybody would see, but just sort of like concepts of like, if I had to do 52 books at DC, I probably would do 12 Batman books, even though I know they sell. What if I had to do 52 with very little in the way of overlap, besides I think Batman and Superman each getting 2 titles, what would I do? And so I was writing things like, how Firestorm, the Firestorm Matrix was actually the U.S. government trying to reverse engineer a Green Lantern ring, and sort of figuring out like how all these different series could kind of like link together, but they could still stand apart. They could stand solo. And so like obviously, I would love to write for the big two. I'd love to write stuff like Shazam, Doctor Strange, Exiles. I'd love to write that. Any of the team books, the JLA, the Avengers, the Flash would be super fun. But at the same time, I don't want to be one of those guys who thinks he can run before he can walk. I feel like I still have a lot to learn in comics. I want to build up my speed. I want to make sure that like I can kind of hit those marks that I want to hit, but do it a little faster each time. And so it's one of those things that I'm a big believer. I think it's Sebastian Paris has it on his website or on his Twitter feed. Work until you don't have to introduce yourself, and I think that's a smart way of doing things. I would much rather kind of build my reputation. I look at Donny Cates as kind of an inspiration in that regard. Anybody who thinks that Donny was an overnight success with God Country, it doesn't know their history. Donny had been toiling away in the trenches for a long time. And so that meant that by the time that he did kind of get his shot at Marvel, he didn't waste it. That meant that he, really kind of nailed it with Venom, and then followed it up with Thanos, and is now doing some excellent work over on Thor. And it's not to say that every single book that Donny has put out has been a grand slam. Like, that's statistics. It just doesn't work that way. But I think his hit to miss ratio is so much higher than most indie people getting their start at Marvel. And I think it's because he put in his time. He did his reps. And I want to do my reps. I want to be a 30-year man in this business. Me burning out at Marvel or DC is not conducive to me being a 30-year man. So I'm okay being patient. I've got goals and things I want to hit, but as long as I kind of keep putting out the best work I feel like I'm capable of, I'm fine, keeping my books indie. I'm fine. I'd be fine doing all books on Kickstarter if I had to. It's the best job in the world, and being able to tell my own stories, there is a degree of freedom to that. And I think the more that I do that, the more freedom I'll have with my licensed stories, with any licensed stories, I should say, down the line.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's impressive to hear you call Donny Cates out, because I feel like there was a point where he was kind of like the underdog and everybody was, really hyped about him. And then like once he finally broke through, I don't know, it felt like I don't know, in the 2000s, there was like this whole trend of like, I like this band, and then they got cool, so now I don't like them anymore. I feel like a lot of people have done that to Donny Cates in some ways, but
sure.
I mean, I honestly think he's going to go down in comic book history as like one of those people that he has comic books in his blood, man. Like, that guy knows what he's doing with storytelling.
I'm so jealous of Donny, because he is the kind of guy who he moves really fast, and he has consistently good ideas. And the fact that he's been able to tackle books, especially his Venom series, which, from all accounts has sort of had like its own unique kind of splits and spin-offs and events that I can't imagine when he pitched it that he was thinking, oh, well, Absolute Carnage is going to be like a whole Marvel event. Like, I'm sure there's no way he could have expected that. Same thing with King in Black. Well, maybe King in Black by then he probably knew, but I feel like, yeah, he's just, he's got the chops. There's no denying that he's got the chops, and you can. I could talk a whole separate podcast about how like the way that the big two system, just kind of like Hollywood, it's a wonder that anything gets made, let alone anything good. Just because like the deadlines are so crushing, that, the fact that people can put out good books twice a month now. I remember a time when they were just monthly. So yeah, I give Donny a lot of credit. I mean, look, comic fans, and I love comic fans, and I say this as a comic fan, but comic fans' tastes can sometimes be a little fickle, and I think you hit it on the head with the metaphor of, I liked them before they were cool, and now they sold out. And I've seen it with just about every writer that I like. And sometimes it's the work itself, like they kind of fall prey to their own kind of worst instincts, and that's what happens when you get super big and you have to crank out work at a accelerated time frames. You don't have the time to workshop stuff. You just have to get it done. And that's an indictment on the shape of the industry, not the creators. But at the same time, like I remember when the first Spider-Man movie came out, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie. That was my Christopher Reeve Superman movie. I saw that when I was a teenager. I was in high school, and I think that was the movie that made me want to create. And so when I see people ragging on it now, I'm like, you were singing a very different tune in 2001 or 2002. I think some of it is like by virtue of like whatever is new and hot and fresh, the stuff that came before, even no matter how foundational it gets, people, it ages a little. That's comics. I mean, I don't think comics were ever meant to be, when they started, I don't think they were meant to be like iconic. I don't think they were meant to be like, oh, that's a premier storyline. That's foundational. They were disposable, And I think I give comic creators everywhere so much credit for having to kind of push themselves through a punishing deadline to put out work that they hope can stand the test of time. And I think there's something a little romantic about that in an artistic sense. And I think it's that love of the game, no matter how hard the comics industry can be, that I think has made comics writers, I think, some of the kind of most rugged and hardy storytellers out of any medium on the planet.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I want to ask you about one other book that's not your own. Are you reading Crossover?
Yeah. I'm a little bit behind. I think I'm an issue or two behind, but yeah, I mean, I've been enjoying it. I think it's very different than Donnie's other work. I think because it focuses so much in the world building element, whereas I think, Donnie's Marvel work focuses, there's the continuity stacking of it all. So it's very different. I got to catch up on it, but I've been liking what I've been seeing so far. And from what I've been hearing, I know, the thing that I am excited about is sort of the more audacious cameos and crossovers that are happening in Crossover. And I think you'd have to be somebody like Donnie or somebody like Kirkman, somebody who has sort of proven themselves in the industry and has sort of become a fixture amongst all the different creatives, that you need that conduit to be able to pull something off like that. I'm excited to see where that book heads.
Yeah. I've only read the first 3. I don't know if 4 is out. If it is, I'm behind on that one. But I've read the first 3 of it, and I really like it. I wasn't so hot on the first one. I was like, this is not what I was expecting. But other people felt like it was, and then the second one, that's where it really hooked me. And some people fell off. But anyway, ultimately, the first 3 issues, it gives me the impression that he's writing a deconstruction of comic book fandom.
Sure.
It feels like everything is kind of like showing us who we really are as comic fans, even on the meta level of him like hyping it up on Twitter, and then it's like this big reveal that really only means something to like him and 10 other people on the planet,
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out in the long term I don't know if the whole story will be done, but it sounds like he has an arc planned out for the first 6. I'm really excited to see where that goes, because that could very much like turn into a Watchmen style iconic story of like deconstructing the fandom of comic books and the industry itself, So I think it's going to be a really cool book.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the fandom could use a little deconstruction. And I feel like that I think it could be really interesting to see where Donnie takes it. And I think he's got a unique perspective, as just given sort of the trajectory of his career, and sort of the way that his career has evolved over the last 5 years. I'm very curious and interested to see where he takes that book.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, you mentioned Roxy
Rewind. Yeah.
Roxy Rewind. So do you have anything to kind of give us on that? Tell us a little bit about what it is.
Yeah. So that'll be in the pages of the Big Hype Anthology, which is going to be hitting Kickstarter on the 17th, February 17th. And yeah, Roxy's a character that actually predates Spencer and Locke. She was one of my 90 short scripts that I wrote. I wrote a short script every day for 90 days. That's kind of how I taught myself how to write. And Roxy is kind of my love letter to classic Spider-Man and sort of the Superman immigrant story, but it's kind of remixed through time travel stories like Life is Strange and Back to the Future. The long and short of it is her mother was a drive-through car hop in 1954. Her father was a time-traveling physicist from the year 2150. They've raised their daughter, Juniper Wells, in the present to split the difference. But as the first ever child of two time travelers, Juniper has the ability to manipulate time up to 60 seconds. And she's going to have to use all of those abilities to save the city as a brand new time traveling, roller derby loving superhero called Roxy Rewind. And yeah, it's a super fun book. I'm working with my Spencer and Locke co-creator, George Santiago Jr. This is a full-length story that's going to be in the pages of the Big Hype anthology. And yeah, I've been really thrilled with the initial reaction to that story. We only just announced it yesterday, but it's been literally in the works for years. I've just been working on this character. I've written scripts for her. I've gotten character designs done for her. I was so thrilled when George said he was available to actually draw her first adventure. And yeah, never say never.
This is a more all ages or a younger.
Okay. Yeah, this is if you've watched a Spider-Man cartoon and liked it, this is perfect for you.
Wow. That actually sounds like really cool. Like I'm pretty excited for that.
Yeah, it's super fun. I was so thrilled when the Big Hype anthology organizers, Doug Wood, I was excited when he said, "Hey, I'm putting together an anthology. I love your work. Do you have 20 pages for me?" And I was like, you know what? I do have 20 pages for you. I had been wanting to I wanted to do something with Roxy for a really long time. And I'm so thrilled that she finally gets to see the light of day. This is a character that has been in the works for the better part of a decade.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I say that she's a Spencer and Locke's big sister in a way, but not at all tonally. But yeah, it's sort of, that's, I think, where my love of mashups was born. And the idea of, you have the story of, first generation immigrants who, their parents came from overseas and sort of their feeling of like, well, for my parents, this is still a foreign country. And for me, I kind of have to navigate, this is my home, but also navigating where I came from and my heritage. Well, that's Roxy's story to a T. It's not that her parents are from different countries. It's that they're from different eras. And so this feeling of, they're not really from around here. We're not really from around here. And figuring out how she can take these different bits of these dual heritages and kind of mash them together into something that's her own. And I figured, 1950s car hop meets time travel scientist, kind of a roller derby superhero feels like a fun way to do that. I'm really thrilled with the story. And yeah, you can order it along with 100 or 280 other pages of story in the Big Hype anthology. That'll be launching on Kickstarter February 17th, but they do have a pre-launch page up now, so you can sign up and be informed as soon as the Kickstarter goes live.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited for that. That sounds cool. I really like Kickstarter projects. I back a lot of those, so this is right up my alley. Yeah.
Well, yeah. No, I love doing Kickstarter related stuff. I like I said, we're going to be doing another Kickstarter for the OZ coming hopefully soon. Hopefully March, maybe April. It means you don't have to wait for permission anymore to tell a story, and that you can just kind of fund your story and put it out there and connect with your readers directly and in a way that makes financial sense. I love the direct market. And of course, I'm always going to keep telling stories in the direct market. But there is something liberating about being able to call your own shots and say, no, I trust in this story and I trust in my team and I trust in our ability to deliver and to pull it off. And I I've said, I will keep telling stories on Kickstarter. That audience, supported a book that didn't have any support, and
Mhm.
so I'll always be grateful for it, and yeah, so it will. Kickstarter will certainly not be seeing the last of me. Certainly not with Roxy. Certainly not with the OZ. There's the best is still to come.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, there's plenty of negative things that can be said about the pandemic and 2020 and everything, but to me, that was one, at least within comics, one of the greatest things that came from all that was Diamond shutting down everything, and a lot of creators like yourself saying like, "Well, I can't depend on this,
Right.
but I can get these out myself," And so we saw a big influx of creators come to Kickstarter, and it's really there was already an audience there, but it kind of like turned things up, and I don't think it just exposed people to creators, less that than it exposed creators to an audience. And same thing, I talked to Bob France and Kevin Cuff of Metal
Yeah, yeah.
Shark Bro, and they talk about that all the time. They're like, it's great because we made this pitch and we go and they say no, and we go and they say no, and they go and they say no, and then we go to Kickstarter, and the only people that can say yes or no is the dollars in the audience.
Yeah.
And once they put their money there, we don't need a publisher anymore. And of course they're still working on stuff. I think they're working on a Top Cow pitch and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But whatever I talked to, that's one thing they talked about is like, I'm not going to leave Kickstarter. I still want to do Kickstarter stuff, but I also want to do some publisher things. And
Sure.
so I think that is the ultimate good that came out of Diamond having that monopoly on the industry is it exposed creators to an audience a lot of them didn't even know was there, and a community that
Yeah.
helps, like as you go through your campaign, everybody's sharing and moving things back and forth. And I got Spencer and Locke recently, the first issue, through a like an indie bundle from Cat
Yeah.
Calamia.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I think it's an awesome an awesome avenue for getting your books out there, and I'm glad that you brought the OZ there and that you have plans to continue doing Kickstarter stuff because
Yeah.
it's a great community.
It's very passionate and very driven and very vocal, and I like that. I've been really fortunate with my fan base, that we had a really strong vocal contingent from Spencer and Locke and going to the chapel, and having them meet the Kickstarter contingent and kind of bringing them all to the same table. That's what I'm always thinking about existentially with the industry and my career in singular is, how can we kind of reunite that diaspora of readership? How can we invite more people to the table? How can we build a bigger table for everybody to eat around? And I think every creator should be thinking about that. Everybody should be thinking about it, not just for the sake of their own work, but existentially to make sure that there's an industry for us all to work in. And I feel like, don't get me wrong, I love superheroes, and even to a wider extent, I love sci-fi. But if that was all I told, that would be a pretty boring way to live and a pretty boring industry to be a part of. And so I'm always kind of trying to think like, what's the weirdest thing I can throw at this industry? Because that's how we keep it interesting, and that's how we bring in new blood. And the Wednesday Warriors are going to be there because they just want good stories. And so me sort of throwing something that's a little out of left field, I think a lot of people, if they read it, they'll appreciate it and they'll get it. But I don't want to preach to the choir. I want converts. And so that's something that I'm always trying to get with my work. And sometimes that kind of puts me at odds with the direct market. I don't care, like it's if I can go to sleep at night, then I've done my job right. And so far I haven't lost any sleep in this business. So I guess I'm gonna keep doing doing things the way that I keep doing them.
Yeah, well, I mean, I often say, I think it's unfortunate that the capes and the superheroes are the face of the industry, at least currently.
Yeah.
Because there's so many indie creators that come into this and they're like, oh yeah, I never read comic books until I was like in college and somebody introduced me to an Image book or something. For me personally, like I read superhero stuff off and on for years, but it just never hooked me to the point that I was compelled to go pick up the next issue. And then I fell into some indie books.
Mhm.
Boom and Image hooked me,
Mhm.
and since then I've been in the store every Wednesday.
Yeah,
And the other thing that I hate is like there's a lot of money from DC and Marvel that goes into advertising and previews, or
sure.
every website I go to, there's a banner for the next Marvel book, and I'm like, you
Right.
don't need to tell me. I knew it was coming out like 6 months ago, dude. Like, stop
Yeah,
wasting your money advertising to the Wednesday Warriors. They know what's coming. Like,
sure.
let's broaden the horizons a bit.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's always going to be a little bit of push and pull between superheroes and the indie things and traditional publishers and Kickstarters. And so I never begrudge anybody for dipping their toes or even making a career out of any of those things. But I think like on the aggregate, we have to, I think, be aware of it. And I think, just like, the innovation is going to come from the indie side of things. The exposure is going to come from the corporate side of things. You kind of have to keep, and you see a lot of creators, look at somebody like Scott Snyder. I'll throw that out there. I mean, he got his start on granted it was Vertigo, but still like an independent ish book. Then did a stratospheric run on Batman, and now he's going back to Image and doing taking that fan base with him. I think that's a trajectory that makes sense. That's something certainly that I aspire to. So yeah, I just it's everybody's career path is going to be different. Everybody's trajectory is going to be different. I never waste time trying to agonize like, oh, is my thing different than theirs? Because it's it's by design. It's going to be different. That's the thing about careers. They all come custom,
Yeah.
no two people should be doing this the same way.
Yeah.
But
it kind of myself. I'm also really excited to see what comes of Marvel with this Scholastic deal, because
yeah,
I think there's this assumption that like comic books and like reading comic books and graphic novels and stuff is like this natural thing, but it's a skill. It's something you have to develop, just like reading a novel. You have to learn to match the words and the imagery and everything. Not a steep learning curve, but the exposure to comics and the format in general is going to help more kids kind of get into that. And if Marvel can go into a book fair and sell a bunch of comics and graphic novels to these kids because it has Spider-Man on it, well, now when they're 13 and 14 and 15 and 18, they're going to walk into a comic shop or go online and order Image books or Boom or whatever else, because they understand the format, So I do hope to see great things come from Marvel being able to partner with Scholastic and get into more schools and stuff like that too.
It's a shifting industry, and I feel like YA and middle grade, the audience is primed. They're there. And I think, it's incumbent upon all of us to kind of try to figure out like, all right, like how do we have stuff that works for them? And I hope that as a result that builds a platform for more mature graphic novels. Because I feel like that market is there just waiting to be tapped, and it might take another 5 years to do it, but when it does happen, I want to be ready for it. And so yeah, it's just it's a crazy industry, and it's one that's impossible to predict. If I could predict the way that the comics industry was going to go, I'd certainly be more rich and more successful than I am now. But that's kind of the fun. I live in California now. Like it's sort of like trying to catch a wave. A lot of times you will crash. I mean, it's very rare to catch a wave and like totally make it fine on the way down. Crashing is just kind of part of it. But finding the wave, that's fun, and kind of when you're on top of the wave, that's exhilarating. And when you're not on the wave, then you're looking for the next wave. You're just kind of, it's the art of taking 1,000 swings, waiting for one to connect. And, taking 1,000 swings is not for the faint of heart. A lot of people get tired after 10. A lot of people get tired after 100. You put in 1,000, it will happen. Statistically, it will happen. So, I'll just be back here and keep taking those swings.
Yeah, there you go, man. That's what it takes, what is the rule? The 10,000 hour rule. So
Yeah, yeah,
if you do enough, eventually something's going to connect somewhere.
yeah. So I'm desperately trying to log in all my hours, and yeah, fingers crossed. Hopefully by the time I'm 40, I'll hit it. Uh, but yeah, until then, I'll just keep tinkering away and hoping stuff connects.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've loved everything I've read from you so far. I definitely need to read more stuff.
Please do.
Um,
My
yeah,
my bank account will thank you. I have a new puppy at home. Cable don't come cheap. But yeah, no, I appreciate the kind words, and I appreciate you reading Spencer and Locke and Scout's Honor. And yeah, I'm as a comics writer, I think we're all operating in some degree of time travel because we're all writing stuff not coming out for another year or two. So I'm excited for the stuff that's like, down the pike. I'm excited for the next Kickstarters. I'm excited for the next pitches. I'm excited for the next teams that I'm putting together. Like the next few years, there's going to be some really fun stuff coming. And so I'm very excited to show all that off.
yeah, yeah. So you have Roxy Rewind, and that's going to be in the anthology on Kickstarter the 17th of
Yeah.
February.
Yep. The big hype
Um,
anthology. Yep.
You said you're working on a horror project. Do you have a date on
Yeah.
that, or
No. That is, we're actually still staffing it. We're still
okay.
finding a team for it, but there is another horror story that I'm waiting for approval to talk about it. It's a short that I probably won't have permission to talk about it for another month. I'm working on Spencer and Locke Volume 3, TBD, and when it'll be finished, because I'm still writing it. But George Santiago Jr. and Jason Smith are going to be coming back for line art and color art, respectively. So I'm very excited about that. Garfield themed serial killer is picking off the Peanuts gang. So it's kind of
This sounds awesome. Every time I hear you mention that, I'm just like, oh, this sounds great.
It's just a lot of research, and the way that the last year went, with projects coming up and the state of the world, my momentum on that one kind of got sapped a little. Yeah, Spencer and Locke 3. We're working on Grand Theft Astro, my upcoming sci-fi book. Book's already written. TBD on the date, but it's supposed to be coming out through Top Cow. Yeah, we've just been kind of stop and start on the art for an insanely long period of time, so it's not on the schedule yet, but the book is written, it's done. So I'm excited for that.
I love that title, by the way. That sounds
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah,
it's Fast and the Furious meets Star Wars with a little bit of Back to the Future thrown in for good measure.
Boom, there you go.
So I'm very
like,
stoked.
It sounds like Grand Theft Auto, so I'm kind of imagining that, but with Astro, it makes me think like space or sci-fi. So
yeah,
that sounds exactly right.
Yeah. So Scout's Honor is still coming out. Issue 2 will be coming out by the time this podcast comes out. It'll be out tomorrow. And then beyond that, just kind of working on. Oh, and the OZ, the Kickstarter for that will probably be the next month or two. And then I've got a full length YA sci-fi book that we are staffing. We are waiting to get that thing drawn. I'm very excited about it. It's a very personal book for me. It's sort of also kind of big and larger than life. It's I don't want to spoil too much about that one. Just a lot of stuff cooking. And that's sort of the best part and the worst part about being a comics creator is the stuff you can't talk about, the stuff that's not ready yet, the stuff that's still kind of cooking a little bit. Lots of fun stuff coming. I'm looking to broaden my horizons a bit, and the next few books are certainly going to run the gamut in terms of genre and tone and the way that I'm writing them. It's just been really fun. Best job in the world.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it sounds like you're having a blast. It sounds like you have a ton of stuff on the calendar, and unfortunately, more TBD dates than solid dates. But
sure.
You clearly know that these projects are in the works and that they'll be here. So I'm excited to read all of this. Is it all 2021 stuff? Are we going to see all of this year, or
No.
you think it's 2022?
Some of it'll be 2022. Some of it may even be 2023, depending on how long it takes to put it together, and if there's but the OZ we'll see more of this year for sure.
Yeah.
We'll definitely finish off Scout's Honor this year. I think the horror short. I shouldn't have said short. Oops. The horror short that I'm waiting for permission to talk about, I believe will be later this year. I think there's at least one more anthology short that hasn't been announced yet that'll be coming. That'll take me through the rest of 2021. And then 2022, I would expect to see some more stuff about Astro, some more stuff about this horror book that I can't talk about, some more stuff about this YA book that I can't talk about, maybe even Spencer and Locke 3. So that will be 2022 and 2023 are going to be very, very busy years.
Yeah, it sounds like it, man. I'm really excited for that. It sounds like we got 3 years already on the calendar for David Pepose. So I'm pretty excited to read all of this.
I'm thinking, honestly, I've got my calendar set for writing for at least the next 5 years. So
nice.
You all will be stuck with me for quite a while.
I wouldn't say stuck, but we'll take it.
More stuff is coming. And if you basically throw a dart at your genre dartboard, and I'm sure I'll hit it. So
awesome. Yeah. Like I've said multiple times, like I wouldn't expect anything else. You seem like you're very excited to explore a little bit of everything. And I'm excited to see how you handle everything, because you have this like really great spin on all these different genres you're touching on. And I really like everything from concept to creation, like you have this really solid head of like, like this has to be fun for me, but this also has to like, like you have this marketing mindset kind of like it's got to be able to reach an audience or else, it's falling on deaf ears. So
right.
I really like what you're doing, man. I think it's all like great stuff. And so I'm excited. And tomorrow I will definitely be checking out Scout's Honor #2.
Thank you. And anybody else who they want to follow me on social media, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Pepose D. It's my last name, first initial, or David Pepose Comics on Facebook. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, Pep Talks, at bit.ly/pepnews, or visit my website, davidpepose.com.
Ooh, I'm a big fan of newsletters. I didn't know you had one, so I'm gonna
have
to get on that.
Yeah, I will be sending one out. I believe, actually, I probably, unless I have my dates wrong, I'll be sending one out the day this podcast goes live. So definitely sign up and check this thing out because fun stuff is coming. And if it's not this week, it'll be the following Tuesday. I send it out every 3 weeks.
Oh, nice. Awesome. All right. Well, we'll send everybody to check you out. And it's been great talking with you, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. And thanks so much for your support and for spreading the word about Scout's Honor.
Of course, man. Thanks for the insight.
Awesome.